Hello, and welcome back to my series about Gacy, the man behind my nightmare. This video will contain numerous clips of audio, media, and photographs from many sources, many not been seen nor heard before publicly, pieced together to tell you more of the story of this man who I unfortunately had the displeasure of knowing in real life. You will hear and see clips from many of the police who were involved with the case, the attorneys for Gacy, the state prosecutor, victim family members, and more, as well as hear Gacy himself talk about what he did. Please be aware this will contain graphic descriptions, photos, and video clips. I do leave a lot out of respect for the victims and their surviving families, but there is still many in this, so you see most of the full story. To get a clearer picture of my association with the man, please go back and watch the first video in this series as I get into great detail about that.
By 1971, John Wayne Gacy is a free man. He is out of jail and no longer married.
I think he thought that he was going to make a new start.
With his mother's help, he buys a house in Norwood Park Township, just northwest of Chicago.
He was just a perfect neighbor. He put on the annual John Gacy block party every year, where he invited all of his friends and prepared all the food for hundreds of people from his neighborhood.
Just as he'd done in Iowa, Gacy becomes active in community organizations and local politics.
He thought he was a big shot in the community, and it turns out that he kind of was. He actually ended up on a stage at a rally right next to the First Lady of the United States, President Carter's wife, Rosalind. The world's largest mass murder, standing right next to the First Lady of the United States, is really something that still sends shivers through my spine today.
Perhaps even more chilling is Gacy's fondness for entertaining children as a character he calls Pogo the Clown.
He did the clown work for charities and going to hospitals and so forth. He would say, if you're dressed as a clown, you can do a lot of things. You can have women on your lap and you can feel them up and you never get slapped. One time he made the phrase of, clowns can get away with murder.
And underneath the political glad-handing and social networking, the darker side of John Gacy once again emerges. In 1972, he kills his first victim.
The first person that he had murdered was a male prostitute that he had picked up. And in the morning, this kid pulled a knife on him, and they had a battle, and he ended up killing this kid. The prostitute has never reported missing. Nothing ever happened with it.
I think he panicked and killed the kid because he had remembered what had happened in Iowa, and he wasn't going to go back to the penitentiary.
Gacy disposes of his victim in the crawl space of his own house. The victim is later identified as Gacy's first by the stab wounds visible in his ribs. Later that year, Gacy marries again.
This wife lived with him in the house on Somerdale for a fair amount of time, and now the bodies are underneath.
But as much as Gacy may appear to live a normal life, he continues to kill.
We know that he would go out hunting in some of the gay neighborhoods, and sometimes he would end up stopping some guys who were probably male prostitutes and get them in and end up killing them.
As with his first victim, Gacy keeps the bodies close by. One he buries under his dining room, and 2 more are buried in his yard. Methodically, he begins filling his crawl space with still more bodies.
His wife told us later on that she would say sometimes, "Man, there's a smell down there, John. What's that about?" He would always blame it on the sewer or septic, and he would spread lime down there, knowing full well that would help to deteriorate whatever was left of the bodies. And it certainly did.
Gacy's secret goes undetected by his wife and by the police as well.
It would have been, I think, very difficult to put a pattern together.
You always have to keep in mind, we're talking about 1978. The computer systems were non-existent in a sense.
In addition to the lack of any centralized computer system in the 70s that might flag him, Gacy's years-long killing spree also goes undetected because he often chooses victims whose disappearance may not be noticed. In fact, several of his victims still remain unidentified. Gacy starts a contracting company he calls PDM for painting, decorating, and maintenance. He hires young men from the neighborhood to work for him.
Gacy was kind of well known amongst these young kids as hiring young men and actually paying quite a bit for the times.
By 1976, Gacy and his second wife divorce. She later tells investigators that John has a violent temper and is rarely intimate with her. With his wife gone, Gacy is free to lure his victims home. Sometimes he targets runaways and random young men, and sometimes he looks no further than his employees. John Zick, Greg Godzik, and John Bukovich all come to Gacy for work and all mysteriously disappear.
Kids hadn't done anything wrong except to go to Gacy for a job. And those kids were just all American kids, nice kids from nice homes.
He would have them over to the house, play pool, have some drinks, you know, maybe show some pornographic films, things of that nature. The whole thing was to lure them to the house.
And once he has them in his house, Gacy uses a series of tricks to get the upper hand.
He would start out with the handcuff trick, in which he would put handcuffs on himself, and all of a sudden he'd come around and show that his hands were free. He said, okay, now I'm going to show you the handcuff trick. So he put the handcuffs on the young man, and of course they would be struggling trying to get out of the handcuffs, and they couldn't do it. And Gacy would turn around, take out the key, and say, see, you need the key.
And with his victims trapped, Gacy tortures, rapes, and eventually strangles and kills his prey.
They'd take a rope shaped like a tourniquet and put it around their neck and twist it with a hammer handle. Twist it, twist it, and twist it until they couldn't breathe, and then they would slowly suffocate from this rope getting tight around their neck.
It became his, and then he did with them what we feel, what he wanted, which was molest them and eventually kill them.
Gacy continues to accumulate bodies, and claiming they are drainage ditches, he even has his employees dig trenches in his crawl space, trenches he will use as graves. But eventually, his crawl space becomes too crowded.
When he finally did get to the point where there was no more room down there, then he started transporting the victims' bodies down to this bridge over to the Des Plaines River.
People in the neighborhood thought well of him. Of course, that was his point. I want everybody to like me. More specifically, I want everybody not to suspect what I'm really doing.
And no one does suspect. At least not until 15-year-old Robert Piest disappears from Nissan Pharmacy.
There's no rhyme or reason as to who his victims are or why. He never laid eyes on Robert Piest until that day, that afternoon. And by 10 or 11 o'clock that night, he was dead. And I'm convinced that a lot of his other victims were the same way. He just laid eyes on them, and in his mind, that was going to be his next victim.
Robert Piest.
It wasn't too long before we just knew that this was a guy we had to stay on. And he knew it.
Investigators immediately determined that Rob Piest's disappearance is out of the ordinary.
There's nothing but good things to say about the kid. He was everything that any mother could want in a kid.
Gacy, who has done some remodeling work at the pharmacy, is quickly identified as a person of interest.
The pharmacist said, well, there was a guy by the name of John Gacy here who's a contractor. He may have been talking to him. The investigators subsequently did a background check on Gacy the next morning.
Police learn of Gacy's sodomy conviction and immediately go to talk to the contractor, who stalls them, claiming he has to plan the funeral of a relative who has just died. Police pressure Gacy to make time for them.
He said, you know what, you guys have no respect for the dead. And here we're standing over the bodies. At the time, we didn't know it. Later on, in hindsight, we looked and thought, you creep.
Gacy eventually comes to the police station in Des Plaines to make a statement. While Gacy is denying any knowledge or involvement in Piest's disappearance, police get a search warrant and go to Gacy's house.
They recovered a variety of pornographic materials, some shackles, some high school class rings, and a variety of driver's licenses from different individuals that were unknown to us at the time.
Police also find a trap door in a closet that leads to a crawl space underneath Gacy's house.
At that point in time, the furthest thing from our mind was that there were bodies down there. There was nothing fresh, there was no fresh disturbance, there was no missing 15-year-old boy down there, so they left it alone.
Police immediately begin following Gacy 24 hours a day.
I was convinced that if we follow him, maybe he's going to take us to where Piest is buried.
In the meantime, Gacy calls in legal help.
He said, the Des Plaines police are tailing me all over the place. I have no idea why. They're ruining my business. They're ruining my life. I'm getting all anxious about it. Can you find out why they're tailing me? From that morning until he got arrested, I never slept again.
Claiming they are harassing their client, Gacy's attorneys plan to file an injunction against the police and state attorney's office.
That injunction was going to be heard in a matter of a week, and we knew we were up against a deadline. In other words, once that injunction was heard, and probably would have been granted, because we had no evidence to charge him with anything.
Neighbors and friends of Gacy can't believe that the police think he could have anything to do with Piest's disappearance. In fact, Gacy sometimes tells friends that the men following him are actually his bodyguards.
Gacy, again, was very cocky about this whole thing, very confident. All of his associates that he surrounded himself with were very sure that we were on the wrong track, and they made that very clear.
But Gacy's con is starting to wear thin. The deeper police investigate, the more suspicious Gacy looks. They start tying the items found in Gacy's house to other missing young men.
Slowly, it began to creep into our minds that, in addition to Robert Piest, there was a very strong possibility that there were some other young men connected to Gacy who were gone, missing.
And in talking to his employees, investigators realized that Gacy's house deserves another look.
When we heard more and more about the digging, it was obvious we had to get back into the house and look in the crawl space. They had to be someplace, wherever they were. Was it possible that these other missings were in the crawl space?
Investigators stay on him. Wherever Gacy goes, the police are close behind, and the pressure is getting to him.
There were bodies buried in the crawl space of John Gacy's house, and he obviously could not get rid of the evidence. He knew pretty sure that we were seeking a second search warrant. He really began to fall apart as the investigation went on, and he realized that we weren't going away.
A week into the investigation, Gacy calls his lawyers and says he has something to tell them.
He sounded very anxious, and I said, John, look it, if it's the same old garbage, I don't want to hear about it, but if it's something new, fine, you can tell me. In the meantime, I had set up a polygraph for him the next day. And I think the combination of that and his being tailed, he just really wanted to open up to me.
So, Gacy drives to his lawyer's office. His surveillance team is right behind him and waits outside as Gacy goes inside to speak to his attorneys.
He looked at me and he said, look, I've been the judge, jury, and executioner of many, many people. Now I want to be my own judge, jury, and executioner. So I'm going to tell you exactly how it all started way back in the beginning. I said, what are you talking about? He said, most of them are in my crawl space. Last 5 I didn't have room for. I threw them into the Des Plaines River. So what are you talking about? And that's probably the last thing I said for the next few hours.
Gacy confesses to Amirante not just about Piest's murder, but about dozens of others.
He remembered names, he remembered what they looked like, where they were in the crawl space. He was making little maps. We just sat there and just in awe and listened to him for the next few hours. And I'm thinking, my God, what am I going to do?
Amirante, with fellow attorney Leroy Stevens, scramble to understand what they have just heard and figure out how to protect their client. Occasionally, the attorneys take a break and talk with officers Dave Hackmeister and Mike Albrecht, who are outside the office, still tailing Gacy.
These guys were obviously very nervous, justifiably so, but they never let on what was going on. When they first came out, they said, don't let him leave. If Gacy tries to leave, block his car in. If he tries to leave, shoot his tires out. Don't let him leave.
Meanwhile, Gacy, apparently exhausted by his confession, falls asleep on an office sofa.
7 to 8 o'clock in the morning, he wakes up and says, what am I doing here? I got things to do, places to go. I got a lot of stuff to do today. I said, John, you told Leroy and I everything during the night, everything. I said, I told you everything? He said, I told you about the crawl space and everything? I said, yeah, John, you told us everything. He had at least told me he didn't remember saying a thing to me. And I don't know to this day if he did or if he didn't remember, but that's what he told me.
Gacy leaves the office of his stunned attorneys. His Des Plaines police escort continues to follow him as the state's attorney's office works against time to get another search warrant. Gacy's harassment lawsuit will be heard in a matter of days.
Late in the day, He stopped to get gas where he always went, and he gave this kid at the gas station a bag of grass. Well, the kid knew that the people following him around were policemen. And when Gacy left, he told one of the surveillance guys, he just gave me a bag of marijuana. State's attorneys found out about it, and they said, pinch him.
Gacy is in custody, and police get their second search warrant. Minutes into executing it, they make a grisly find.
It didn't take more than 5 to 10 minutes, and they discovered human remains, bones, and a
Second search warrant. They immediately go for the lime-covered crawl space.
I don't think any of us really thought we were going to find Robert Piest, but there was definitely something down there that needed to be uncovered.
Within minutes, an evidence technician finds human remains. There had been a lot of talking going on because the house was filled with all kinds of police investigators, and it was just silence. Everybody just stood there in silence.
We've got human remains in his crawl space. He's under arrest, period. Not just for marijuana either.
Back at the police station, investigators tell Gacy that the game is over.
Gacy asked me if we were in a crawl space. And I said, yeah, John, we were in a crawl space. And he looked at me then and he said, well, that's what the lime was for, Mike. And I says, what do you mean, John? And he said, the lime was to cover the smell of the bodies.
And as he had the night before with his attorneys, Gacy begins to describe what he's done.
Nobody said a word. I mean, somebody would ask a question, and we just sat and listened and took notes. We were, at least I was anyway, in somewhat disbelief. Like I said, I didn't believe him. I really didn't believe that he had killed, 20 or 30 people. I thought he was bragging.
And just never any remorse out of this man. He always blamed the kids. It was always their fault.
Over at Gacy's house, the medical examiner, Dr. Robert Stein, is called in.
It's frightening. That's the only word I can use. Frightening.
And the media arrive on the scene, though details are initially scarce.
At that point, all we knew was there were some skeletons found in a home at that address. And as the day developed, we found out that it was much, much worse than that.
So by the time I got over there, there was crowds around the house, people around the house, and there was police, and I didn't know what was going on.
Back in nearby Des Plaines, Gacy stuns investigators with the details of his crime.
He took a little pink message pad and he drew a map from memory of where the graves were. And the map was very accurate. And in some instances, he had buried a person, maybe 2.5, 3 feet down, and buried another one on top of that.
Ever the con man, Gacy even crafts his confession carefully, only giving details when he knows a body is found, and even creating an alter ego who he says committed the crimes.
When we first arrested him, and he made his first admissions, the only thing he ever told us was that it wasn't him, it was his alter ego. Jack did it. John didn't do it.
He looked at me right in the eye and said, Mike, I'm not going to spend a day in jail on this. John Gacy is never going to spend a day in jail for this. And so at that point, he thought he had himself covered and he wasn't going to be convicted.
Gacy is booked for murder. As he poses for his mugshot, he even makes a joke. His laughter is caught in the photograph.
One of the questions on the arrest report is place of birth, state you were born in. And he answered out of a state of confusion. He just thought that was the funniest thing.
Meanwhile, the excavation of 8213 Summerdale Avenue continues.
We heard an exclamation, kind of oh my goodness, from the technician who had been doing the digging. And we all turned around and said, well, what's the matter? And he said, I've got another rib cage. And everybody just kind of looked at each other. And it was really the first time that we got a feel for the fact that this guy might have been not exaggerating.
The excavation stops briefly for Christmas.
After Christmas, digging resumed, and each day disclosed more areas where more bodies were found. And the digging was done with it in mind to go down farther than just one body if a body was found in a trench. There were about 8 areas where bodies were stacked on top of each other.
The latest horrible news is 6 bodies exhumed.
Press conferences are held on a daily basis to update the body count.
The idea that 30 bodies were inside that house was staggering. As the news spread, every media outlet almost in the world showed up eventually.
Meanwhile, investigators continue pulling apart Gacy's house beam by beam, searching for remains.
It was my task to interview one of the cops. I came up, introduced myself to him, and said, I just want to know what it's like in there. And as this cop was going under the tape, he looks at me and he said, if the devil was alive, he lived in that house.
Stunned neighbors join the media crowded outside the house.
He was a nice guy.
You see bodies in your sleep, you see him in your sleep. It's just too much.
It was something beyond comprehension. I mean, a serial killer will oftentimes do his killing in different places. John Wayne Gacy did his killing and left the bodies there with him in the same place.
Despite the massive recovery effort, investigators have still not found Robert Piest.
We kept pushing and pushing and pushing about Robert Piest. We had to recover Robert Piest. And he agreed to show us where he had disposed of Robert Piest's body. He, along with a couple, 3 carloads of other people, policemen, state's attorneys, his attorneys, drove way out to southwest of Chicago to this bridge, and he pointed out the spot where he pitched his body into the river.
A team of dental experts from Cook and Will County have identified the male white body recovered from the Illinois River this afternoon as that of missing Des Plaines youth, 15-year-old Robert Piest.
Gacy's home, his pride, his joy, his killing ground, is literally pulled apart by investigators and eventually razed altogether.
He's trying to save his house. Unbeknownst to him, it was being demolished from the inside out because they had to get in there and very methodically recover the victim's remains.
And as the medical examiner takes on the Herculean task of identifying the remains, Gacy's prosecutors start preparing for trial.
We know he was cunning. We know he was a con man. We know that he must have thought that he was above the law at some particular time. And it finally came crashing down on him.
Today in Chicago, charged with the sex murders of 33 young men and boys.
John Gacy's death toll is staggering. 26 bodies buried in his crawl space, 3 more buried elsewhere on his property, another 4 thrown in the river. He admits to the killings, and on February 6, 1980, John Wayne Gacy goes on trial for his life.
We were going for the death penalty based on the felony murder of Robert Piest. Even that one case alone would be eligible for the death penalty.
So he went to defense. He did it. The only way around it was insanity.
To help him prepare a defense, Gacy's counsel Sam Amirante calls in attorney Robert Mata.
Frankly, when I first met Gacy, he was rather a plump, non-threatening type of an individual. He didn't look the part of a gruesome mass murder. They call it the defense of last resort, but insanity was about the only thing we could do. I mean, let's face it, the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming.
Is Gacy evil or insane? A jury will decide first whether Gacy is guilty or innocent by reason of insanity. Both sides bring in psychiatric experts to attest to Gacy's mental state.
I don't know in my heart whether he was insane or not. The psychiatrist said that he was. At least ours did.
Throughout the trial, Gacy shows little, if any, emotion and seems concerned not about the charges against him, but about smaller details.
He was extremely manipulative, absolutely without remorse of any kind whatsoever. Compulsive liar. I believe he was incapable of any sort of true emotion. He would talk about his murders and the corpses like, he used the words human trash. He was more concerned about the county wrecking his carpeting than he was about them exhuming corpses from his basement.
Never any emotion, never anything, sat there and doodled.
One of the most powerful statements in the trial is made not by any witness, but by 2 exhibits on display in the courtroom: the crawl space opening and a victim's board, a large wooden panel that holds the pictures of Gacy's victims, at least the ones that have so far been positively identified.
The main thing that we wanted to get across to the jury was the reality of the fact that there were teenage kids who had been murdered by this guy. It personalized the victims.
In their closing argument, prosecutors use those 2 exhibits to make a dramatic finish.
I said to the jury, you want to show this man mercy? You show him the same mercy. And I just stopped in mid-sentence, went over to the victim board, ripped each picture out of the frame one at a time with a big snap, walked back in front of the jury and said, if you want to show this man mercy, you show the same mercy he showed when he took these lives off the face of the earth and put them here and threw them in the crawl space opening. And it was a pin drop moment.
5 weeks after the trial started, the defense and the prosecution rest, and the jury is left to deliberate. Barely 2 hours later, the jury has a verdict.
When the jury first went out on guilt, it's like it always is in a trial. Well, it's up to them now. We've done everything we can do. And we all went back to our offices. A couple of beers got popped, and the phone rang.
We had just gotten over to this restaurant that all the prosecutors and defense attorneys and judges used to go to. We were there for an hour and 20 minutes and got a phone call. I was stunned by that, stunned by the fact that they didn't deliberate.
Gacy is guilty on all counts.
Our first vote on sanity was unanimous that he was sane. The foreman then said, let's take a vote on guilt. And they took that vote, and that was unanimous. That took about 15 minutes. The reason they were out 2 hours is because since there were so many victims, there were so many verdict forms that they all had to sign, that they spent an hour and a half passing all of these forms to each one of them.
I'm his attorney, not his judge.
Knowing the insanity defense was a long shot, Gacy's attorneys are not surprised by the verdict, but rather by how briefly the jurors deliberate.
The jurors were going to find him guilty, no matter what we did, because of the sheer magnitude of the crime. If you look at a crime like that, they don't want a man like that in their midst. He killed the boys, he's guilty.
Once the guilty verdicts are decided, it is time for the jury to determine whether Gacy will live or die.
If he's found guilty and we saved his life, that's still a victory. No lawyer wants to lose his client to the death penalty, no matter who the client is.
But the jury decides that Gacy will die for his crimes. The prosecution is pleased by the outcome of the trial and even gets some unexpected praise from Gacy himself.
He sent a message out afterwards that he wanted to talk to me in the bullpen. So I went back there, said, "What's up, John?" He complimented each of the prosecutors and said that he thought he'd had the best trial in U.S. history. And he said the jury did the right thing by finding him guilty, but they should not have given him the death penalty. And I said, "John, why not?" He said, "Well, they didn't hear the whole story." I said, "John, I got nothing to do for the next 4 or 5 weeks. Let's start right now. Why don't you tell me the whole story?" He laughed. I said, "I'll see you at your execution."
See the juice!
After 14 years, John Wayne Gacy's attorneys finally exhaust the appeals process.
John Wayne Gacy, it's time for you to die!
The execution date is scheduled for May 10th, 1994. And despite copping to the crimes in the 70s, Gacy is now claiming his innocence.
For 14 years, I've been fighting the same battle. All I want is the truth to be learned, that I did not commit all the crimes. You see, if I'm right, they're wrong. And if I don't get justice, then neither did the victims' families.
I truly believe that the day Gacy died and got that lethal injection, he didn't think he was going to die. And he actually convinced himself after all the years, after talking to many lawyers, that he didn't do any of the crimes, too.
Outside Statesville Prison, crowds gather to say goodbye to Illinois' most notorious serial killer.
There was a relatively small candlelight vigil, but there was a fairly large contingent with kegs of beer. The loudest thing that night was coming from over the wall out in front from the beer party, and it was na 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 goodbye. Na 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 na.
Wayne Gacy! Goodbye! Kill it! Kill it!
And shortly after midnight, John Wayne Gacy, the most convicted murderer in U.S. history, is put to death.
John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection.
Gacy was pronounced dead at 12:58.
His last words were, in essence, that taking his life would not compensate for the loss of the others. He basically said that he saw this as the state murdering him, and he didn't think that would serve justice.
We're happy to report to the victims' families and to the hundreds of people that his horror reached out to and whose lives were affected for all time that he is dead. He got his just deserts punishment, and justice has finally been served.
As they had been outside Gacy's house in the 70s and his trial in the 80s, the media come out in force. The press conference following the execution is even held in a location befitting the media circus.
We were brought out to the front of Stateville Penitentiary, where they had set up a circus tent. Big blue, I'll never forget it, a big blue and white circus tent.
He got a much easier death than any of his victims. In my opinion, he got an easier death than he deserved.
His victims should have had it so good.
Anguished family members of Gacy's many victims are thankful that justice has finally come to the man who once called himself the judge, jury, and executioner of many.
What can you do when the kid is dead?
I'm just glad that finally a little justice was done in this matter.
My son should be remembered.
But Gacy's execution does not necessarily mean the case is closed. In 1998, acting on a tip from someone who once saw Gacy digging there at night, police dig up the yard outside the apartment where his mother once lived.
I am going to interrupt here for a second and point out this is the apartment building on Miami Avenue that my grandmother and Marion Gacy lived at.
Technicians paced off the yard and driveway of the home where John Gacy's mother once lived, and slowly, methodically scanned it inch by inch.
Though this time police find little more than some marbles in a saucepan, some connected with the case believe that Gacy's victims may number more than the 33 for which he was convicted.
In my mind, I believe there may be. We know that he would travel up to Wisconsin, up to some wooded land. There could be more there. To this day, I don't know.
Gacy's record as the most convicted murderer in U.S. history has been surpassed by the Green River killer, Gary Ridgway,
Guilty.
who confessed in 2003 to the murders of 48 women in the Seattle area. Today, a police resource center is located in the shopping center from where Robert Peace disappeared. And a new house sits on the Summerdale Avenue lot that was the scene of Gacy's many crimes. And while decades have passed since Gacy's killing spree began and other cases have come and gone, the men who investigated, defended, and prosecuted him say that John Wayne Gacy haunts them still.
It's still interesting to people because it was such a phenomenal case at the time. The idea that some one person could kill 33 people over a period of 6 years and get away with it, and continue to get away with it. The question arises in people's minds, is there somebody else like that out there?
You can't tell a serial killer by looking at him. A serial killer does not look or act like you would think a serial killer to look or act. That's the scariest thing about it. 50 years from now, 100 years, people will still be talking about John Gacy. And maybe that's what some of these serial killers even want. That's one of the things they like, is they like that kind of publicity. His name lives on.
He was cruel. He was intelligent. He was a torturer. And he was a brutal killer. And because he was smart and because he could play the role of Mr. Suburban Contractor, he got away with it 33 times. And that's a huge lesson for everyone. The evil is out there.
This next part of the video contains audio recordings of Gacy himself and his lawyers. You can hear himself describe what he says happens. Interesting part, however, is even with these recordings, and there being no doubt he did this and this is his voice, he still tried to claim until the day he died that he was innocent and that he was framed. This is only about 30 minutes or so of the recordings, and there are several more hours worth, so if you would like more, please comment and let me know so I know if you are interested in all of it.
Okay, now what happened at the Greyhound station?
To the best of my knowledge, I parked on Clark Street, and then after parking on Clark Street, I got out and I was walking around. just walking around. I happened to run into this that was standing outside there. I just said hello to him, I guess. I don't recall I don't know the conversation.
Why'd you go to that guy? Why, who possessed you to go up to some guy?
I don't know if he came to me and asked me a question about where the street or what it was. I don't know how the conversation got started. He was explaining that he had time to kill. I thought I was just fucking around. He said he had time to kill.
You remember that specifically?
Yeah, because he said something about he had missed his bus or he was late over waiting for a bus until noon.
What did he look like?
I think about 19 or 20 years old, blonde-headed. He had I think Levi's on and sort of like a lumberjack jacket type thing.
Remember what color it was?
And a large belt buckle on.
You remember what color the jacket was?
Blue and white checks or green and white checks. I don't recall.
Did he have a mustache?
No,
Was
blonde.
he wearing glasses?
No. Blonde-headed with blue eyes.
What kind of a shirt did he have on?
I think a flannel shirt.
Do you recall?
No.
Long hair, short hair?
Short, or something like modest hair.
What was his name?
I don't know.
What were you wearing?
I don't recall. I don't know.
What car were you driving down there?
It would have to be a green Oldsmobile station wagon.
Do you remember? Is that the car you had in 1972?
No, I don't know. I think it's a green. Yeah, because I think I still had the first Oldsmobile that I got since I come out of the institution.
Were you drinking before you met this guy?
I was at my aunt's house, so I had a drink there.
You think you were at your aunt's house?
Yeah.
Did you stop anywhere between your aunt's house, your house, and the bus station?
No.
What about drugs? You take any drugs?
No, not that I know of.
What happened?
He said he had time to kill. I said, well, if you want, I said, I'm just cruising around. If you want to ride, you can ride with me. And when we started riding around, I believe I started the conversation asking him if he ever gotten into sex or ever gotten blown or that. And would he like to get blown? He said, yeah. That's why he ever been blown by a guy and didn't seem to think there was anything wrong with it.
I want to ask you something. Is there anything that you remember specifically about picking him up, the car, anything specifically that we can tie a date into?
No,
remember the car you
the only chronological order that I can give you the date from is that it had to be right after New Year's. I know.
Now remember what I told you about assumptions, John. You're assuming you were in that green station wagon, right?
I think that's what kind of a car I had.
Do you remember specifically?
No.
Right now, do you remember?
No.
You remember getting out of the car
because
talking to this guy.
the reason why is I had several green Oldsmobiles. Then I think I had one blue one, and then I went to black.
So you're reconstructing.
I'm trying to reconstruct.
Do you remember specifically getting out of the car and talking to this guy?
No, because it possibly be that I was still sitting in the car, and he came up to the car.
You don't remember?
I don't know.
Didn't you mention to me on a prior occasion that he had a key to a locker?
Yeah, in his pocket.
Did you remember that specifically?
Yeah, because that was after he was dead. It was in his pocket.
No, I don't hear the rest of the story. About the guy. Start talking about sex, and then what happened?
We went out to my house. He said he was hungry. Something about being hungry. That he didn't mind getting into something like that, but he was hungry. Came out to my house, and I fixed him something to eat. And we sat around eating, and I think we had a couple drinks.
Yeah.
This had to be around, I'd say, 2 o'clock in the morning.
So you do remember having drinks then?
Yeah, I think I drank there.
He was there with you?
Yes. Out of the house. Then we went to the rear bedroom with the green carpeting, which would be the back bedroom, not the present one, which was the master bedroom, the red carpet.
there any reason you went to the bedroom and you didn't do it in the living room or somewhere else in the house?
I don't know.
So
We went into a bedroom where there was twin beds.
It sticks out in your mind, you remember that.
Yeah, there was twin beds in the room because that was my room. The front bedroom was my mother's at that time. See, and she had a double bed. But we went to the room where there was twin beds. Because I don't know. I'm assuming, maybe I thought that my mother might come home in the morning. And that's why we were in my bedroom, because he could go in one bed and I could go in the other. We both got into oral copulation. After it was over, I think I just fell off asleep.
Think.
Yeah, I had to. Because I was laying in bed and I woke up and I seen him come in the room with a knife.
Where were you when you woke up?
In bed. My bed. The one farthest closest to the window.
Where did you have sex?
In the same bedroom. On the other bed where he was sleeping.
The other bed.
Yeah.
Now you said
because after we had the sex, he lay down on the extra bed and I lay down.
What knife? Did you see the knife? What kind of knife did you have?
From the kitchen, the knife that I cut the sausage with.
Where was that?
Laying on the counter in the kitchen.
And he was just coming at you with that knife. Were you saying anything?
No, because I think I startled him.
Where was he when you first saw him with the knife? How close to you was he?
About 2 feet from me.
Almost right on you.
Touching you?
Yeah.
Over you on the bed?
He was coming at me with the knife.
Is it possible that you weren't waking up from a sleep, but were waking up from a stupor? That you had been conscious, but
that's possible. I don't know.
Did you get violent with this guy during sex and all?
No.
Is there any reason he'd come at you with a knife that you could think of? Anything?
The only thing I could think
before?
of. The only thing no. We had oral sex, and after it was over, we both were, he was tired. We were both going to go to sleep.
What was he wearing when he had the knife in his hand, coming towards you?
I think all he had on was his Levi's.
And what did you do?
I jumped up and I wrestled with him in the bedroom. And pushed him out of the bedroom into the hall, and then from the hall into the front bedroom.
Where was the knife from?
In his hand. I was holding his one hand. I got slashed from him, and I was able to knock him down.
Where you slashed?
On the left wrist.
How were you holding him?
His
arms? Were you holding his arms?
Yeah. I grabbed his arm.
You grabbed his arm as you saw the knife coming down on you. You didn't have his arm already. You grabbed it as it was...
Yeah. Well, when I fell out of bed, because I knocked him off the I wrestled him all the way into the front bedroom. There, and I think while I was wrestling was when I got stabbed. And that's what made me mad. Because I took the knife, I think I stabbed him in the chest 4 or 5 times.
How did you get the knife?
After I knocked him off balance.
Yeah, you said after you knocked him off balance, you were holding his arm and he slashed your wrist.
Yeah, because he come down with the knife.
Well, how did you get the knife out of his hand?
Well, when he lost balance and I knocked him over, when I fell on top of him, when I fell on top of him, the knife moved his hand.
This was in another bedroom?
What position?
Both of my knees into his stomach and chest. Grabbed the knife from him and...
This is after you had wrestled into the other bedroom.
Yes.
Then he fell down and you were on top of him.
Yes.
Did you have clothes on then?
Did I have clothes on? I think just underwear.
Did he have clothes on?
Yeah, I think he had his Levi's on. Just his pants. No shirt, no shoes or socks.
So he wasn't dressed to leave?
No. Because I think he was saying that he was sorry. He was sorry. He didn't mean that he wasn't going to hurt me. Or, I don't know.
You stabbed him 4 or 5 times?
Yeah.
Did he appear to die immediately, or was he still alive? Was he breathing, or did he appear to be lifeless after the stabbing?
I think after the first or second stabbing, all you could hear was the gargling of blood.
How many people would you say that you brought to your house in the past 5 years, Jen, that are still alive?
Roughly? Yeah. Maybe 400 or 500.
Well, why the hell, why are some dead and why are others alive?
Because, like I said before, some of those, the ones that were killed with threats of violence or blackmail or shit like that. I think that I'm not positive because I'm only surmising.
Specifically,
No, but
people.
I might be just surmising it. But some of them that were killed were at my house more than once. In other words, once they came and participated, second time they came back with blackmail in mind. And rather than pay the blackmail, I eliminated them.
Do you remember that specifically?
No. To this day, I don't understand why we went and had that conference downstairs. I more or less gave them more roots, more foundation.
During that conference, did you make it clear, was it made clear that much of what you were saying was conjecture, was things that you had formulated in your mind because of existing circumstances? You'd come to a certain conclusion. That's the way you talk. I mean, everything that comes out of your mouth is some kind of a conclusion you form.
Well, just like with Dr. Hartman and Dr. Riefman, I told them, the majority of my conversation with them has been purely on hearsay, not things stating that I've actually done them. Things that I stated to them that I know of. Well, then how do you know of them if you've never talked to Jack Hanley? I said, I don't know. He said, how do you know when you turned into Jack Hanley? I said, I don't know. He said, well, then how do you know in fact there is a Jack Hanley? I said, because I recall using the name. But as to what the hell transpired after it, I don't know.
Well, I think Jack Hanley was used, as you said, when you were picking up people. You didn't want them to know their name.
I didn't want them to know my name.
You reflect back on them, on those situations, and assume a Jack Hanley exists. In fact, what's happening is when things are done, you're in some sort of a fugue state, I assume. I mean, a state wherein you'll do complicated things, usually brought on by liquor and drugs. I'm convinced of that. The next day, a body's laying in your living room. You don't remember the specific details. You remember the details up until you start to get buzzed, start to get high. You reach a certain point.
That's why I can remember meeting some of them. You know?
You remember using the name. Remember meeting them. Remember where you were going, and then.
But then they come out with the conjecture that I have I passed myself off as a police officer and stuff like that. Or they come out with the stuff that I've been in gay bars. I was afraid to go in gay bars because I felt that if somebody ever found out about it, that it would be bad for my reputation.
Do you remember, aside from the first killing that you described to me already, any of the details of any of the rest, aside from
Bukovich?
And you think, you're assuming that Bukovich was the second.
Yeah.
He was buried in the garage.
Okay, and I remember getting into an argument with him, but it's not like the way they say. Bukovich was out to my house with 3 others. They came out there, they were drinking, I was drinking, we had drugs. All 4 of them left.
Including Bukovich.
All 4 of them left. Bukovich and his 3 friends, they all left. Okay, because John was doing the driving.
Okay, what happened then?
Okay. I think they left around 10 or 11 o'clock. I think that I either took a nap or still was high enough that I got it in the notion to go out driving. I went out around midnight. I went down to Bughouse Square, which was the usual routine. In the process, there was nobody down there, or there was nobody that looked right, so I cruised on down Lakeshore Drive, got off at Montrose, was cruising around Montrose Avenue, Lakefront, Foster Avenue, Lakefront. I ran into Bukovich on Lawrence. No, I ran into him actually first. I spotted his car down at Foster Avenue Beach at the Lawrence Avenue exit. Then he had stopped his car at Sheridan and Lawrence. And I pull up, I double parked, I never even parked the car. And I stopped. And he asked me what I was doing. I said, I was just out cruising around. He said, I'll ride with you. Now, this is after we had just had an argument less than
an hour ago.
2 or 3 hours ago. Because this had to be around 1 o'clock in the morning. He got into my car. We drove around for a while. Then he wanted something to drink. So I said, well, instead of spending any money, let's go out to my house. We went back out to my house. We drank some more.
In your car?
In my car. We drank some more. We smoked a couple of joints. I think the handcuffs were behind the bar. Then he started talking again about that he could kick my ass. Because he was telling me about his problems with his dad, and that he needed the fucking money. I said, that's fine. I said, who's going to pay for the goddamn carpeting? He said, well, just go and tear it out of the apartment and shit like that. I said, fuck no. I said, you're sticking me for $325, and then you want me to give you a check for $160?
What's the $325? What was the argument about initially?
He had left because he had gotten into it with his dad, and his dad took the apartment away from him. With his dad taking the apartment away from him. But now, meanwhile, the day before, he had just gotten into a fight down on Halsted and Ohio Street. No, not Halsted and Ohio. Halsted and Halsted and Clinton, or somewhere in that area. They had gotten into an argument. In fact, they beat up somebody with a pool stick.
They, you mean him and his friends?
The Puerto Rican buddies. Yeah. And he wanted to get out of town because they were going to come and get him. That's why he wasn't going home. His dad had kicked him out of the house. His dad had kicked him out of the apartment. Told him that he was no good and all that shit. And wanted to get rid of him. Just get out. I suppose somebody's going to have to pay for the carpeting. He charged the carpeting to me, and then his father took the apartment back from him to rent it out, and then he was going to not pay for the carpeting, which was $325. He had a check coming of, I believe, $125 to $150, somewhere in there. He wanted his check. And he said, I could get the carpeting back from his dad. I said, like hell. And I'm going to go argue with your dad. So then he got into an argument with me. That's what the argument was. The same argument was expressed to his dad, and his dad knows it even to this day. John knew he couldn't get his check until he paid the $325, because I told his dad. Then his dad says, well, this was after John disappeared. He said, give me he said, the hell with John, make the check out to Marco. Okay, that's like hell I am. I said, you going to pay me for the carpeting first? Or I'm going to take the carpeting out. He said, no, you're not. You don't get no carpeting. In his broken English.
So when you got back to the apartment, then?
No, we went back to
your house. I'm sorry.
We're drinking, and we got into a fight, and then...
About the same thing, basically.
It felt like he wanted to fight again. So, we were fucking around, arguing back and forth, and I talked him into putting the handcuffs on. Once he got the handcuffs on, I pinned him down, and I told him, I said, now you might as well settle down and get it straight for once and for all, because I am not going to give you a check. I said, I don't give a shit what the hell you do. And then he said, let me up. I said, I ain't letting you up until I get done explaining it. I said, goddamn well you owe me for the carpeting. You're not getting your money until I get mine. And then he told me that if I didn't let him up, or if I would let him up, he'd kill me. He threatened to kill me. He said, if I get loose, I'll kill you. He says, because he had nothing to lose. I said, well, if that's the way you think, then it's either you or me. I am assuming from that point forward, I don't remember if I killed him or I just left him on the floor there. I do know that he was dead.
When do you remember him being dead?
Around 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning when I came out of my bed. He was still laying on the living room floor.
Did he have his clothes on?
Yep.
Were his hands still handcuffed?
Yep.
In back of him or in front of him?
In back of him.
When he was dressed?
Yeah.
How was he?
I don't know. I don't know if they found him with his clothes on or off. I don't know if I took his clothes off to bury him or buried him with his clothes on.
How was he killed?
There was a rope on his neck. When I had left the drugstore, first of all, I arrived at the drugstore at 5:30, left at 7 o'clock. When I come home at 7 o'clock, I did some Valium. I only think I did 2 10 milligram Valiums. Then I went back because I would have never gone back to the store. They called me up and told me that my book was there, and then I decided to go back. Because when I originally was there, I was there with my car. I had no intentions of going back there. In fact, I was at my house. I cleared the tape off. And when I cleared the tape off, there was a call from Larry Torr for his brother, stating that I had left my Bible. I left the store at 8:50. I drove away from the front of the drugstore and parked in front of the restaurant. Okay. He came out and walked over to the truck. He was talking to me on the outside of the truck. I had invited him in the truck. He got in the truck, told me he had a little time. I said, well, I've got to make a stop, and then I'll be coming back up to school. So he rode with me to the house. That I remember. He came to the house. From this pharmacy over to my house, it's got to take. First of all, we didn't leave, and it had to be 9 o'clock because I think the news was on the radio when we were driving down to it. We didn't get to my house until about 9:15, 9:20. I know that I had 3 or 4 phone calls, and that I cleared the answering service twice in that period of time. I talked to the electrical contractor. I talked to the plumbing contractor, Max Gus's. I can't think of who the electrician was. I had talked to somebody else. Talked to Raphael. Raphael wanted to know why I wasn't out of his house yet, because I told him that I hadn't gotten there yet. He had talked about a summer job. I told him that I didn't know if I could hire him at all. No. That he should wait till summer comes. And then I don't know, I told him there was other ways he could make money. If that's what he was interested in. He didn't like the idea. We didn't get into the idea. We were discussing some sex. Well, then he had put the handcuffs on himself. Okay, I of course expounded further on him getting blown, and he didn't like the idea. And then he was scared that he was going to get killed. I don't know. He said he wanted to go home because he thought that I was going to harm him. So why would you say that? You know, I don't recall exactly what he said. I don't remember.
How was he killed?
Strangulation.
The rope trick. Or did you put the rope on his neck?
He was in the
Did
bed.
you have sex with him?
No. He was strung on the. He laid on the side of the bed because then I had to leave. The phone was ringing again, but the answering service was on. Then I had to clear the answering service, and when I cleared the answering service, this is Johnny, this is Aunt Leon. We're on our way to the hospital. They called us about Uncle Harold. I went and changed my shirt and grabbed my jacket. I changed my pants and shirt, grabbed my jacket, got in the car, and took off. Now, this had to be 10:15 or so when I took off.
And he was dead.
Yeah.
Did he have his clothes on?
Yeah.
You remember the actual killing? You remember
No.
strangling him?
No.
You remember carrying him into the bedroom?
No, he walked in the bedroom.
Why?
I told him that's where the key for the handcuffs were. Where he wanted the handcuffs on.
Is that when you killed him in the bedroom?
Yeah.
From behind or in front of him?
No, standing right next to him.
Did he struggle?
He fell on the floor, yeah. See, all I did is, after the rope, he was standing there when I put the rope around his neck. He was standing right there. Because all I said was, I want to show you something. But then I don't remember. I think he fell on the floor, because that's when the phone rang because I left.
Who was it? It was your aunt?
No, the answering service had covered it. But then I had to go clear the answering service up to find out who called.
So the phone was ringing while you were killing him.
Yeah, I think so.
This last part are recordings of a few of the detectives as well as attorneys as they talk about the last victim, Rob Peace, and the arrest of Gacy and the case against him.
Well, what happened with that is, actually it was, at that time we dispatched officers to take reports. And it was Officer George Konitsky who went to the, and took the report. And when he got done with the report, which he would have come in, he was working 3 to 11 shift at that time, and he came in and he went to juvenile division. And, in the late 70s, kids were running away. They're constantly happening. In fact, a lot of times they weren't entered in right away into the computer because that was, back then, was a very meticulous operation to enter anything into the computer. But when he got done with that, he made the effort to get a hold of juvenile guys and said, this is not your normal runaway. This kid is just like you just said, an all-American kid, great family life, no girlfriend problems, school problems, anything. There was just no reason for this kid. So then they started looking into it right away.
But George, to his everlasting credit, he went back to the location where Robert Peace had last been and got the names of everybody that had been there that night. He did that evening. And then as things would happen the next morning, I came into work. I was the early detective. And the Peace family came into the station quite early, wanting to talk to the detectives to see what was being done. Well, the lieutenant, Joe Kozenzak, was in his office. He comes out to my area and tells me to go get the reports at night. I've always said, police work is a lot of hard work, but boy, we really rely on luck a lot of times. And because he had arrived home in the van, and Rossi, I believe, arrived in the Oldsmobile that he had. And what happened was, in the way the driveway was set up, you can't really see the cars if you're south of the house in the back. And when they followed the van thinking it was Gacy, and by the time they caught up to it, they realized it wasn't him, that he had, and there was only one car following him, I believe, which is when I say we were lucky, because, had we followed Gacy in the car and found Peace's body in the trunk, the case would have been over. We had no reason to think anything else. We were looking for one person.
Well, I'm not sure which one would be the right way, but from how I recollect that I was told about it was Kozenzak and Summershield were there, and they talked to him, and like you said, he blew him off and said, he couldn't. And they left, Kozenzak left, told Summershield to stay there. And I hadn't been aware of Rossi being there, just that Gacy pulled out with his car, the Olds, and Summershield was trying to follow him. But one car, you can't follow anybody, especially trying to be covert. And Gacy lost him very quickly.
Where because possibly there was patrol cars or barge, but because you were stuck. You were just stuck with the body in the trunk?
No. They gave the guy the keys to get the car out.
The trunk was empty.
Yeah. The car was muddy. I fell asleep at the wheel, that's why I said I don't remember.
But it really didn't paint a basis for a connection between some of the items that they actually recovered, or even the ones that did wind up at trial, since Judge Garippo did not suppress any evidence based on that warrant. Some of the serious pieces of evidence. Well, here's the point. If you just say, search for Robert Peace and search for evidence of the detention of Robert Peace, that's too broad. If you ask them to search for ropes and handcuffs, or whatever, if you have some basis for that, and we can argue about whether they did or not, I think you would have a basis for that in any detention, but at least put it in there. But the bottom line is there was no kind of bridge between any specific items, and that's a common problem with search warrants. And so, for instance, narcotics involved police officers and other law enforcement groups dealing in those kinds of cases, are very well schooled and very well experienced in being very specific about it. Firearms, same thing. Well, he showed me the gun and he put it back in the closet. Or, I went there to his apartment to buy heroin, and he got the heroin out of the top dresser drawer in a box and sold me 2 packages.
He came in to be interviewed at that time, and that's when I had probably a 2.5, 3-hour conversation with him. He had come into the station, as I said before, to be interviewed, and while they were getting the search warrant, I had entertained him because he wasn't being held, so I was just going to talk to him and try to keep him there without telling him he could leave, if he wanted to. He was telling me how important he was, first of all, how he knew Walter Jacobson, and that how he had important friends, and I knew a lot of it was just BS, so I just kept saying, really, tell me more about this. And he was in his glory, he was a big blowhard. He just kept talking. I didn't care what he said. I probably don't remember half what he said, so long as he talked and didn't go anywhere. So actually he was asked to stay at the station, and he did. He stayed there while we went.
All right, he says, I looked down in the crawl space. The reason I went down to the crawl space is when I got in the house there was the white line was all over the goddamn quarry stone floor in my entranceway, and also on the wall. It looked like they came up out of the goddamn hole after falling around down there. They had put lying all over every goddamn. I was pissed off about it. I couldn't figure out what the hell they went down the crawl space for, because there was nothing down there.
But you knew there was something.
What I'm saying is, in regards to, they were looking for peace. Okay, there was nothing down there. Okay, there was no undisturbed ground. There was nothing. So they went down in there, and they must have crawled all over it because they come up with lime all over them. They just smeared the goddamn lime all over the house. I was pissed off about that. David Graham says that I went down in the crawl space. I did not crawl around. I just crouched down and made a complete 180-degree circle and came back out, which is the truth. They asked him where else I looked. He claims I went in the attic. I don't.
Why did you go down there?
What?
Into the crawl space.
I just explained to you because there's goddamn the plastic stuff.
So what? I mean, why would you go down there? You know what I'm getting at? I mean, why did you go down
there? Was
I
going down there
to see if they discovered it?
No, that wasn't on my mind. I didn't think of that.